It's after dark. Do you know where your legal AF is? Speaking of AF, let's turn to Brett Kavanaugh, who apparently should never have gotten anywhere near the United States Supreme Court, given the new revelations that have just been dropped by the Senate Judiciary Committee, that Brett Kavanaugh, the vetting of his sexual assault and sexual harassment allegations against him was killed. The vetting process was killed by Donald Trump in the White House. Does that surprise anybody? And now we've got it on record. We got the receipts that none of the 4,500 tips that came into the FBI tip hotline, none of them were investigated prior to the confirmation hearing and the vote to put Brett Kavanaugh in as Supreme Court Justice. We talk about it on Legal AF. Take a listen. Why don't you tell the audience about this the Senate Judiciary Committee report headed by people like Sheldon Whitehouse, who finally got to the bottom of what we always suspected, which is that the Trump White House didn't want Brett Kavanaugh, now a justice on the United States Supreme Court, properly vetted. There were 4,500 tips to the hotline about people who claimed to have knowledge about Brett Kavanaugh being sexually assaulting women at various points in his life. There were at least 3 that wanted to testify in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and they were shut down by Mitch McConnell. Only 1 was able to testify. Another woman who knew him from Yale Law School was not. She was not, and none of them were interviewed by the FBI. Not the high school classmate who observed it, not the woman who said she was jumped and attacked by him in Yale Law School, or even Dr. Ford Blassie, who testified tearfully to the Senate committee authentically about the attack. She wasn't interviewed by the FBI either. Why don't you walk everybody through? And then I always like to have a little bit of a call to action. Like, what can we do about it? It's, now that we've identified the evilness behind it.
Yeah, well, so there's a Senate Judiciary report coming out this Thursday, headed by Democrat Sheldon Whitehouse. I had to read the reporting on this a couple of times because the difference between Senator Whitehouse versus the White House, because at one time, at certain points, I was like, wait, do they mean the White House or White House? Anyway, so, but it's Sheldon Whitehouse, and the report's coming out, and the reporting basically said that in 2018, specifically September 2018, around the time when Christine Blasey Ford came out and came forward and talked about the sexual assault that Brett Kavanaugh did to her in high school and testified bravely before the confirmation hearings. Of course, that was so reminiscent of Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill. It's like these brave women are coming forward. They're telling us who these monsters are. And somehow they get confirmed anyway, and then they prove to be monsters on the court. Anyway, it's just so frustrating. But anyway, publicly, what was so interesting was publicly Trump was saying at the time that the FBI had, quote, free rein to vet claims of sexual assault, and the FBI is talking to everybody. Trump said, I want them to interview whoever they deem appropriate at their discretion. And that was what was publicly done. And what was surprising, though, is that how little they were permitted to do. And you ask yourself, why is this coming out now? And the reason this is coming out now is because, in fairness, also the Biden administration, but both the Trump administration and the Biden administration really blocked the Senate's efforts to get hold of these FBI records. And it took all these years in order to get this information so that we would be able to know exactly what happened now 6 years later. And, it's funny. At first you ask yourself, well, why would the Biden administration do that? And I had to put on my law enforcement hat. And it's just so interesting because, I was in law enforcement for so long as a prosecutor, and law enforcement, they hold their cards close to the vest. They don't want to release anything about their methods and means and their investigations. And, there's all these security concerns, but also investigatory concerns. And you don't want to, turn over too much stuff if it's not necessary, et cetera. So it's kind of frustrating, but at the same time, I remember it quite well. But what's coming out in this report is that apparently the FBI was very surprised to hear Trump say these things publicly because they were told to do a very limited inquiry in a very short period of time. I think it was a week's time. So what they did, and this is all in contemporaneous emails that Senator Whitehouse and the Judiciary Committee was able to obtain. It was things that they were emailing the White House basically saying, can you please give us additional guidance and directives? Because on the one hand, publicly, Trump is saying, go at it. But internally, we are being told not to do these things. And so they were confused by these conflicting public statements to what their mission was. So this is going to be released Thursday, and it's going to essentially provide the evidence that we all suspected was there, that the White House, Donald Trump, exercised very tight control over this investigation, despite Trump saying otherwise to the American people, once again, lying, right? I get so frustrated with these misinformation, disinformation. This is called lying, okay? And, the other things that I thought was very interesting was that there were like thousands of messages to the FBI tip line regarding Kavanaugh. They were forwarded directly to the White House. They didn't go to the FBI. They went to the White House, where they went into what we call the circular file, also known as the trash can. The FBI had no written protocols to what to do about this. They call this a supplemental background investigation because what they're doing is doing background on this Supreme Court nominee, right? That's what he was at the time, and they do a background check. And whatever their protocol is for a normal nominee background check, that's what they were doing. But this is called a supplemental background check because this is now somebody coming forward and making an accusation. And apparently the FBI does not have any protocols in place for supplemental background checks. And so the White House instructed the FBI to talk to 10 witnesses. And that was about it. Don't pursue corroborating evidence. Don't pursue anything else. And so despite the fact that, as you said, Christine Blasey Ford came forward and talked about how 30 years earlier he ripped off her clothes and groped her and sexually assaulted her, another accuser from Yale came forward. This is from a colleague at Yale. Okay, this isn't like, some random off the street. This woman came forward and said that he shoved his privates into her face during a dorm party. Disgusting, right? And it's just, I don't know, the whole thing is just ridiculous. And the thing that this report really confirms is what we all thought, which is what a sham this investigation was. And look, the FBI, of course, it's not their fault necessarily. They're like, look, we follow whatever our protocols are, whatever our process are. But they say they don't have independent authority to expand scopes of investigations or supplemental background investigations outside whatever the request of the agency is. And when you've got the White House making a request saying this is what you should do, that's what they're supposed to do. I don't know. It was a little flimsy of an excuse. I didn't like that, but that was their reasoning. But the emails show that this was very much they at the time said, WTF.
Well, what they're supposed to do is the FBI does it, as you said, an initial background check, criminal in nature. They're not really there to follow up or follow through with any kind of complaints. And on a standard background check, Brett Kavanaugh's sexual assault history is not naturally going to come up. But then there's supposed to be enough time for members of the Senate Judiciary Committee getting the initial report and whatever information their staffers provide to them to request additional investigations. See, the committee can do that too. It's not the Senate Judiciary Committee, not just the White House. But the Senate Judiciary Committee was not left with enough time because of Mitch McConnell, who wanted, as always, to short track everything. Like when he got Amy Coney Barrett confirmed in 36 days, he only gave the Senate Judiciary Committee a very short amount of time. They literally had 1 hour. Once the news broke about the assault history of his, as alleged, they had 1 hour to look at not a summary, raw data from the complaint tip line, the hotline. 1 hour to look at 1,600 pages of data. Now, the once the candidate got on the ropes in confirmation process, which Kavanaugh did, at least for 2 days, then it's up to the White House to decide how to save their candidate. And they made a political calculation that they didn't have to save him, that they would just work with Mitch McConnell to shorten the amount of time. They would tell the FBI, they would give the FBI no further instructions about conducting a investigation, while in public, Donald Trump was telling the public, yes, we should get to the bottom of all these things. The FBI should do a full and fair investigation. While in private, he and his people were telling Mitch McConnell and the FBI no such thing. In fact, the FBI went back and said, we just heard you say in public that you want us to do an investigation. What is the nature of the investigation you would like us to do? What's the scope? How many people should we put on it? And when? What's the deliverable? What should we be providing you, and when? And by the time they got all that sentence out, Mitch McConnell had already called for the vote. And Kavanaugh got on, bought and paid for. I did a hot take on this recently, and with our new collaborating partners on the Legal AF MTN channel, Court Accountability, bought and paid for by the NRA and the gun lobby. They spent $1 million, $1.2 million to get Brett Kavanaugh confirmed. And what do you think they did? They wanted in return exactly what has happened in the last 2 terms, which is a complete abdication of any responsibility by the United States Supreme Court right wing to try to have any type of sensible gun control. None. And Kavanaugh is always the deciding vote, as is Gorsuch, who they also spent $1 million to make sure that he was confirmed. That's all you need to know in all of this. So some of these pieces in the Senate Judiciary Report, as you said at the top of the segment, were sort of known by us, but now the curtain is drawn back, and we see exactly the fingerprints and sinister hand of Donald Trump and his henchmen, making sure that Kavanaugh, their guy, to rip down a woman's right to choose in the Dobbs decision, a reliable vote against women and reproductive rights, especially a guy who like Donald Trump, is a serial misogynist and sex assault abuser. Of course, they want him, and a reliable vote in Gorsuch. So they've gotten exactly what they wanted, and they know from Kavanaugh, from his writings when he worked in the White House and clerked and all of that, they knew that he was going to be in favor of a unitary president, a expanding presidential power, expanding the executive branch, so that it's not an equal branch of government any longer, and to overturn the administrative state and administrative regulatory power through overturning the Chevron decision, which gave judicial deference to experts in their field that are in these regulatory agencies. This is the playbook, besides Project 2025, which is the playbook and the database they're going to be using to fill the government. The other playbook is a checklist they've been using since they got the numbers. And Kavanaugh is part of that, of getting the majority there. Rip away a woman's right to choose, reduce her to second-class citizenship in America, check. Done. Dobbs. Rip down the wall between church and state. 4 different decisions in the last 2 years have done that. Done, and done. Take away the administrative state and the regulations to help the American people in environmental protection, in OSHA for workers, in the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Internal Revenue Service. Done. Take away all sensible gun control. Done. And we have Kavanaugh, who shouldn't even be anywhere near the Supreme Court, even on a tour pass, and yet he sits in judgment as one of the all-powerful 9 making decisions against our will. It's just, okay. That's where we are for that. Welcome back. That was Legal AF at the midweek. Karen Friedman, Agnifilo, and Michael Popok. Join Legal AF, the podcast, every Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time right here on the MeidasTouch Network, 8 p.m. Eastern Time for the YouTube, and then you can pick up the audio podcast platform of your choice. Look, we got a new channel, Legal AF MTN, and we're bringing it to you, the overflow, if you will, at the intersection of law and politics in collaboration with the MeidasTouch Network. So go find us on Legal AF MTN as well. And until my next podcast and my next Legal AF MTN, this is Michael Popok, and I am reporting. In collaboration with the MeidasTouch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.